I believe we are on air now. I've got to go and check everything, make sure before I go any further. This is going to be another episode of Conspiracy. So, me hit play on Rump. Yeah, it's up and going. Hit refresh on YouTube. I go in and make sure that the video is actually going to the proper playlist and stuff like that before I start. Also gives me a chance to put a thumbnail up and check the audio, so it's good. Let me see what we have here. Here we go. So get that done. Oh, forgot to do the playlist. Put the thumbnail on and then forgot to put the playlist on. And this goes into live stream. Let's save. And now do an audio test. Okay, sounds like we are ready to go. Now I have to pop up the talking points. Today is going to be the last day for the year that I use talking points, and I will come back in next week and do a review, basically, retouch or touch up on some of the things that I discussed. So, with that being said, I got my talking points, notes, whatever, up and ready to go. I'm going to do a countdown and then I will start the introduction. So here we go. Actually, let me drink a cup. I'll get a drink out of my coffee. All right. So here we go. 3, 2, 1, now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Conspiracy here on the wonderful world of weirdness. I am Roger Hanson, and I will be your host for today. Today, we are going farther into what I was talking about before, where I wanted to cover more modern conspiracies that have been taking place. Last year, I came in and I kind of skimmed through a lot of the more traditional, older conspiracies that people talk about even still today. But there's a lot of them that haven't been discussed very much here recently. And I also, whenever I started up the season for the year, it was during the time that they were disclosing the JFK file, so that was a perfect time to kind of get into this topic. Now, some of the streams that I've done related to that, some of them did. You can take your pick on if you think that they do relate or if they don't relate. I just wanted to deliver the information, so that's all on you. It's your decision what you want to think when it's all said and done. With that being said, today my topic is going to go into Jade Helm. And a lot of people, even today, don't know much about Jade Helm 15. Well, that is what I'm going to cover. I've noticed that here in the last 10 years after Jade Helm 15, there's been, in my opinion, effort to make all of that disappear. So when you look on the internet, you listen to people talk in chats and stuff, you never hear them discussing Jade Helm anymore. It's like a taboo or something for them. So I decided that my final talking points for this season is going to be Jade Helm after all of the stuff I've discussed it. So with that being said, I'm going to uh, go ahead and get into my reading, and I hope you guys enjoy. So Jade Helm 15 was a large-scale military training exercise conducted by the United States military across several states in the southwestern part of the country during the summer of 2015. Now, the operation involved special operation forces and conventional military units conducting simulated unconventional warfare scenarios, supposedly to improve coordinated and readiness or coordination and readiness in complex environments. Now, the exercise became widely known not because of its military objectives, but due to the significant controversy and speculation it generated among segments of the public. Some individuals and groups believed the exercise was a cover for martial law or a prelude to government overreach, with theories ranging from the confiscation of firearms to the use of closed stores as internment camps. These theories were widely circulated in social media and talk radio, but were not supported by any evidence. State and local government were informed in advance, and military officials publicly addressed the concerns, reiterating that the exercises were simply routine and necessary training operations. There was no verified or documented escalation in the confiscation of firearms in the United States directly linked to Jade Helm 15, despite widespread speculation and conspiracy theories that circulated before and during the exercise in 2015. No credible evidence has surfaced showing that Jade Helm was used as a pretext for gun confiscation or martial law. Firearm confiscation in the United States typically occurs when with specific legal circumstances. These can include court orders related to criminal convictions, domestic violence, restraining orders, or red flag laws in certain states. However, these actions are part of established legal processes and are not connected to military exercises like Jade Helm. The public concern over gun rights did intensify during and after Jade Helm media attention, but rather than leading to confiscations, it often spurred increased gun sales and heightened political activism. Many gun owners and advocacy groups cited Jade Helm in their calls for greater vigilance regarding Second Amendment rights. But again, there was no formal or covert program connected to Jade Helms that resulted in an increase in firearm seizures nationwide. Since 2015, the number of firearms recovered and traced by law enforcement in the United States has increased significantly. In 2015, around 217,000 guns were traced annually. By 2020, this number had climbed to nearly 393,000 per year. This dramatic rise means that nearly 800 guns are now recovered and traced across the country each day. Between 2017 and 2021, law enforcement agencies submitted nearly 1.9 million firearms for trace requests, marking an increase of approximately 36% during that 4-year period. These figures indicate a growing effort by authorities to investigate and remove firearms from criminal circulation, then reintroduce them back into criminal circulation so that they can trace those weapons once again. Another notable trend during this time involves the time to crime statistic, which refers to the duration between when a firearm is illegally purchased and when it is recovered in connection to a crime. Before 2015, this time period was generally longer. However, in 2020, over half of recovered firearms had been sold within just 3 years of being used in a crime. This shift points to a faster turnaround from legal acquisition to illegal use, which may reflect both increased gun sales and accelerated trafficking patterns. Although the data reveals that more weapons are being recovered and investigated now than prior to 2015, the combination of higher confiscation rates and shorter time to crime intervals suggests a more dynamic and potentially concerning landscape for firearm regulations and enforcement in the United States. These patterns appear to stem from a broader mix of factors, including rising gun availability, shifting enforcement priorities, and evolving tactics of criminal networks. Since the year 2015, the number of retail store closures in the United States has risen significantly too, compared to the years before. In the mid-2010s, the average number of annual store closures was in the lower thousands. However, beginning around 2017, this trend shifted dramatically. That year alone saw more than 12,000 retail stores shut their doors, marking one of the highest totals on record at that time. The situation worsened in 2020 during the height of the global pandemic, which caused widespread disruption across various sectors. Nearly 9,700 stores closed in that single year, and the net loss after accounting for new stores opening was over 5,900 locations. In the years that followed from 2021 through 2023, closures remained elevated, but were somewhat tempered by new openings. For example, in 2023, around 4,600 stores closed, while 5,500 new stores opened, which resulted in a small net gain. If this brief stabilization did not last, in 2024, the number of store closures surged again, reaching approximately 7,300, a significant increase over the previous year and highest annual total since the peak seen during the pandemic period. Projections for 2025 suggest an even more severe trend, with as many as 15,000 retail stores expected to close by the end of the year. This would more than double the total seen in 2024. At the same time, the number of new stores opening is projected to hover around 5,800. A number that does not come close to offsetting the closures. The sharp rise in store shutdowns since 2015 can be attributed to a combination of factors, including the rapid expansion of e-commerce, the lingering effect of the pandemic, high inflation, ongoing supply chain issues, a rise in bankruptcies, and an increase in organized retail theft. Compared to the relatively stable retail environment before 2015, the past decade has marked a period of significant and continuing decline in the number of operating physical retail locations in the United States. Since 2015, the number of firearm retailers in the United States that have been forced to close due to actions by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives has increased significantly compared to previous years. In recent years, there have been a steady rise in revocation of federal firearms license following inspections. Many dealers have also voluntarily surrendered their license to avoid lengthy and costly legal battles. This rise in closure is largely due to a stricter enforcement policy introduced in 2021 that mandates the revocation of licenses for serious violations, such as selling firearms without proper background checks or falsifying records. As a result, the number of license revocations more than tripled within a short period after the policy was implemented. Before this policy change, the agency revoked an average of fewer than 5 licenses per month. Afterward, this number increased to nearly 10 revocations per month, indicating a significant increase in enforcement action that have led to more store closures. Overall, since 2015, there has been a clear and substantial increase in the number of firearms retailers closing due to regulatory enforcement, especially following the introduction of the stricter policies that increase the frequency of license revocations and voluntary surrenders. Jade Helm 15 was a large-scale military training exercise conducted in 2015 that took place across multiple states in the southwest United States, including Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and California. The exercise was planned and led by the United States Special Operations Command, involving thousands of military personnel from different branches, including Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, and other elite units. The purpose of Jade Helm 15 was to train troops in unconventional warfare, counterinsurgency, and urban operations in a variety of environments. It focused on improving soldier skills in working with local populations, gathering intelligence, and operating in challenging terrain, such as desert and urban areas. The training aimed to simulate scenarios that could potentially arise in future conflicts, including operations within the continental United States. The exercise involved a variety of complex maneuvers, including 5 fire drills, simulated hostage rescues, reconnaissance missions, and joint operations with other agencies. Soldiers were instructed to move covertly, blending into civilian environments, and coordinate actions across state lines. The training required cooperation with local law enforcement and emergency services in some areas, adding realism to the operation. The unconventional warfare scenarios practiced during the 2015 military training exercise in the southwestern United States were designed to prepare troops for complex and ambiguous conflict environments, where traditional battlefield distinction between combatants and civilians might not exist. These scenarios included guerrilla warfare tactics, where soldiers would have to operate in small, highly mobile units, often behind enemy lines, relying on stealth, deception, and local support to achieve their objectives. The exercise emphasized blending into civilian populations, requiring troops to practice cultural sensitivity and intelligence gathering to identify hostile actors without alerting them. Another important component was counterinsurgency operations, where military personnel learned how to identify and dismantle insurgent networks by working closely with local communities. This involved building trust with civilians to gather actionable intelligence while minimizing collateral damage. The scenario simulated environments where the enemy used asymmetric tactics such as ambushes, improvised explosive devices, and hit-and-run attacks, challenging soldiers to adapt quickly to fluid and unpredictable combat situations. The training also incorporated informative operations, teaching soldiers to manage and counteract propaganda and misinformation campaigns that insurgents might use to influence local populations or undermine military efforts. Psychological operations were part of this, aimed to weaken enemy morale and encourage defections. Urban warfare training focuses on operating in densely populated areas where distinguishing between civilians and combatants was difficult. This required skills in close quarters combat, hostage rescue, and minimizing damage to infrastructure in non-combatants. Soldiers practiced clearing buildings, navigating complex urban terrain, and coordinating with multiple units in a fast-changing environment. Special Operation Forces also trained in sabotage and disruption tactics, such as targeting enemy supply lines, communication networks, and infrastructure, often conducted covertly to avoid detection. The scenarios included coordinating with local resistance groups to proxy forces to destabilize hostile regimes or organizations. The unconventional warfare scenario emphasized adaptability, intelligence-driven operations, and the ability to operate with limited resources and support in environments where traditional military advantages like overwhelming firepower were less effective. These these scenarios reflect lessons learned from recent conflicts where irregular warfare and hybrid threats became more prominent, preparing troops for a wide range of potential future missions, both abroad and potentially within the country. Since 2015, there has been no official declaration of martial law in the United States. While there have been instances where military force was used in domestic situations, These actions did not constitute formal declarations of martial law. Martial law in the U.S. is typically declared by state governors or the federal government during extreme circumstances such as war or insurrection, and involves the suspension of civil liberties and the imposition of military authority over civilian functions. The last known instance of martial law in the U.S. occurred in 1963 in Cambridge, Maryland, in response to civil rights unrest. In recent years, there has been discussion and proposals regarding the potential use of martial law, particularly during times of political unrest and national emergency. However, these have not resulted in actual declarations. For example, in December 2020, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn suggests that President Trump could declare martial law to rerun the 2020 election in contested states. This proposal was widely criticized and not acted upon. Similarly, during protests in various cities, there have been calls from some individuals for the imposition of martial law to restore order. But these calls have yet led to any official declarations. Since 2015, there have been numerous instances where individual organizations and political commentators have pointed to what they interpret as signs of government overreach in the United States. These concerns have spanned across different administrations and involved a range of issues, from surveillance and data collection to pandemic-related mandates and law enforcement tactics. While opinions on what constitutes overreach can vary depending on political and ideological perspectives, several themes have consistently drawn attention. One area frequently cited is the expansion of surveillance practices by federal agencies. Following revelations in previous years about widespread data collection, many people remain concerned about the extent to which government agencies continue to gather personal information. The growth of technologies such as facial recognition, cell phone tracking, and social media monitoring raised fears that federal and state agencies might be encroaching on individual privacy rights. Local law enforcement's access to such technologies has also contributed to a growing sense that boundaries between federal oversight and personal liberties have blurred. Another area of concern has been the use of executive authority, particularly through the declaration of national emergencies. Since 2015, multiple emergency declarations have allowed the executive branch to bypass certain checks and balances. For example, during the health crisis that began in 2020, a series of mandates were issued that restricted public movement, enforced business closures, and required medical compliance. While some saw these measures as necessary for public safety, others viewed them as examples of excessive and unaccountable government control, especially when state and local officials enforce restrictions using punitive measures. The use of law enforcement and federal agents in response to protests and civil unrest has also been viewed as a potential sign of overreach. In 2020, federal officers were deployed in several cities during widespread demonstrations, and their presence was sometimes justified under the protection of federal property. However, critics argue that the use of unmarked vehicles and agents without clear identification created a chilling effect on lawful protest and raising questions about accountability and transparency. Property rights have also come under scrutiny. In some urban areas, the use of eminent domain or the imposition of environmental or zoning regulations was seen as disproportionately affecting certain communities. The debate over land use, particularly in rural and energy-rich states, sometimes centered on whether federal agencies had too much control over public lands and private property development. Additionally, attempts to regulate information and control narratives have stirred concern. Content moderation on digital platforms, often in coordination or alignment with government messaging, has led some to question whether freedom of speech is being undermined through indirect means. While private companies enforce these actions, their alignment with public policy discussions, especially around elections and political health, has led to allegations of government influence in silencing dissonant or alternate viewpoints. Financial control is another area in which signs of overreach have been discussed. Measures such as asset forfeiture, increased scrutiny on financial transactions, and restriction on banking for certain industries have led critics to argue that the government wields financial leverage as a tool of control. Some point to the expansion of financial oversight mechanisms as a subtle but powerful form of governance that bypasses traditional legal processes. The growing presence of government influence in education, healthcare, and technology development has been viewed by some as evidence of a deepening entanglement of the state in daily life. The push for centralized curricula, healthcare mandates, and federal involvement in technological research and development has led to ongoing debates over where the line between necessary governance and intrusive oversight should be drawn. The Bundy Ranch incident fits into many of the themes that have been discussed, especially those concerning government overreach, land rights, and expansion of federal authority, and public reaction to perceived abuse of power or abuses of power. The events that unfolded at the Bundy Ranch in 2014 and the related standoff at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in 2016 became symbolic moments in the broader narrative about the relationship between the federal government and citizens, particularly in rural parts of the United States. At its core, the Bundy Ranch conflict centered around a long-standing dispute between Cliven Bundy, a Nevada rancher, and the federal government. Bundy had refused for years to pay grazing fees to the Federal Land Management Agency, arguing that the federal government had no constitutional authority to control large swaths of land in the western states. His position drew support from individuals who believed that state governments not federal agencies, should control public lands. The situation escalated when federal agents attempted to seize Bundy's cattle as payment for unpaid fees, leading to an armed standoff involving militias, private citizens, and government forces. This confrontation highlighted a growing divide between segments of the rural population and federal authority. Many viewed the federal response, complete with heavily armed agents, no-fly zones, and mass mobilization of resources, as excessive and indicative of an overly aggressive government posture. On the other hand, federal officials argued that they were enforcing laws that had been repeatedly ignored for years and maintained the rule of law on public lands. What made the Bundy standoff resonate beyond the immediate conflict was the rapid mobilization of armed supporters from across the country. This showed a deep undercurrent of distrust towards federal power and a willingness among some groups to physically resist government action. It echoed larger concern about surveillance, militarization of law enforcement, and perceived erosion of individual and state rights. For those watching the broader political climate, it seemed to align with earlier and later incidents involving federal land use, government enforcement, and populist resistance. The related event in Oregon, when armed individuals led by members of the Bundy family took over a federal wildlife refuge in protest of the imprisonment of two ranchers, again put a spotlight on the tensions between federal authority and citizens in the western United States. It raised questions about who owns and controls land, how laws are enforced, and how citizens can and should respond to what they perceive as unjust actions by the state. In the years that followed, federal courts struggled with how to handle prosecutions related to these incidents. Some charges were dismissed due to prosecutorial misconduct or lack of evidence, while others led to acquittals or minimum sentences. These outcomes further fueled debates over fairness, selective enforcement, and political motivation behind government actions. I also want to point out the fact that Jade Helm 15 happened a year after the Bundy Ranch incident, which brings us to that topic. Now, usually I would like to stay on here and go as close to an hour as what I can, but to be honest with you, I am sick and tired of doing these solo streams. It's getting on my nerves. I do have 38 minutes on this. I put up as my talking points. I've got them out there. And like I said, this is going to be the last episode that I do with talking points. I've got one more episode to do with conspiracy this year. And this final one is going to be me going back over the stuff I discussed earlier and doing a review of it. So that's what's going to consist of the next episode. Now, like I said, I started doing this year with the JFK assassination, and I went through as much information as I possibly could when it comes to what I perceive as modern conspiracies that have been taking place, and things that really should be discussed, that haven't been discussed. I really have this strong feeling that people, not only here in the United States, but worldwide, we've been dumbed down. We've been taught that this stuff that we think is important today is important when in reality it's not. It's just a whole lot of nonsense. And this has been orchestrated. This has been orchestrated so that there can be more control over us and more infiltration. The government can come in and infiltrate our media sources. They can infiltrate the local law enforcement within our our towns and our cities, and throw propaganda out there so that they can regulate what we see, what we hear, things of that nature. Um, it, it's really getting out of hand, when you look at um, law enforcement agencies that are militarized just like the military. I mean, what does what do these police officers need with an armed freaking military freaking vehicle when they're doing freaking protests and stuff like that? It's just completely ridiculous. I mean, things of that nature. And I'm not trying to get into anything political about what's going on right now or not. Believe it or not, I wanted to end this with Jade Helm. This is the one thing that I did not want to leave out because I believe that it's something that our government has been wanting us to purposely forget. You know what I mean? They want us to forget Jade Helm and what that really was about. This, I strongly believe, has nothing to do with forces outside of the country. I believe that this is our government's way of teaching our law enforcement agency and our military forces that it's okay to kill fellow Americans. All of a sudden, our own people are the insurgents. Our own people are the bad guys. We are the enemies. So let's brainwash these people in the military and freaking government organizations that it's okay to murder freaking Americans. Who cares? You know what I mean? They're just freaking insurgents against the cause. You know what the cause is, right? The cause is what your government says is right. It's not what you say is right. And that's the kind of stuff that's going on. So, all I'm saying is, uh, don't be, don't be, don't be fooled by the things going on around you, and understand that it's about discernment. When you have this feeling in your gut that you know something's wrong, there's a good chance that it's wrong. Don't go off of some bullshit that somebody you like, who's close to you, says that freaking makes it alright to do bad things. You know what I'm saying? If you honestly feel that what's going on around you is wrong, then there's a good chance that it's really something that is wrong that um, needs to be understood, because you can depend on the way you feel about situations like these. You don't have to have confirmation from other people to freaking feel good or bad. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people really need to realize in today's world. Um, it's okay to freaking hang out with people and have the same point of views and stuff like that. But when it comes down to making your own decisions, you need to go off of your own gut feelings and the things you know before you freaking start reacting to situations, because the things in today's world are getting pretty real. You know what I mean? Um, and with that being said, I'm just going to leave it at that. That's my piece, and I'm not I'm not going to wade from that. I've done a lot of research into stuff like this, and I know a lot of evil things that people have done in just the last 100, 150 years, and there's nothing good that came out of any of it. So I'm not going to waver on this with the way I feel. You know what I mean? Go with your gut feeling. If you know freaking that the things that are happening today is wrong, then it's wrong. Don't 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 listen to freaking other people. Listen to yourself. So hope you guys enjoyed. We are streaming on Rumble, X, Twitch, Kick, and YouTube today. Hopefully, this isn't bad enough to get me in trouble on YouTube, but I went ahead and gave it a go. I hope so. I hope it wasn't against their policies. I think I mentioned a little bit about that in the reading about how the platforms are being um, used by frickin' the government and other organizations to where they can regulate what we say and what we don't say. So, if you guys did like it, please like, subscribe, share, make comments. Love to hear your feedback. Just, understand that everybody has a different point of view. So, respect each other and don't be a dick. You know what I mean? Because in the end, man, we're all going to be the ones that are involved in all this stuff. And it really depends on what side of the fence post you want to be on, the good side or the bad side. You know what I mean? So I am going to end this stream. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys have a good day, and I will talk to you later.